Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So Daniel and I are back, just based on like events in the world at large. We made the decision to do some episodes where we're going to talk about the psychology of cults. And this is the second one that Daniel and I recorded, though Daniel, you did another one where you were talking about people's experiences within this. And so you had
Yeah.
sort of a conversation with that too. So, you know, we're not a political podcast, but we're trying to respond to the events in the world and present things that maybe help make sense of things for people.
Yeah.
So that's
Yep.
our vibe. Yeah. And so we started off really talking about the psychology of cults, and we're going to try to talk through it in kind of three big ideas. We like to do these little series, trying to make this a little educational. So we're really on the subject matter of conformity and looking at conformity as kind of a part of like cult psychology and going deep into sort of like the psychology of conformity. And then the other big idea that comes up is social cohesion, which is sort of like a sociology term we're going to do. And then eventually we're going to talk about the charismatic power of the divine leader,
Hmm.
which just makes one laugh given the present circumstances. But we're doing the psychology of conformity part now. Um, just as a full disclosure, I am like full COVID positive, so you'll be able to get to enjoy my COVID voice throughout this episode.
It's sexy though. You gotta be honest. You know what I'm
I
saying?
I figured like I had to record while COVID voice was going.
Not only are you're sex positive and COVID positive right now, Eric. So
Yes, I got all the
you got
positives.
all the positives, man. You're
I
in
got
it.
the negative positives and the positive
Yeah,
positives.
well, take it while get it while it's hot
Yes,
and
get it
while your
while the getting
temperature is
still
up.
good.
While your
Before some,
temperature is up and everything else.
yes, that's right. Before the barriers go up, everything might
Yeah.
close off. Get everything while the getting's good. Who the
That's
fuck
right.
knows? Grab everything you can,
Hmm.
so to speak. All right. So we're talking about the next big subject. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The usuals. The usuals. So at the beginning of every episode, it's my responsibility now, thanks to Daniel reminding me that we remind you to like do all the things everyone always asks you to do, like subscribe and helps everybody out with the algorithm, including us. And we're definitely trying to break out of the conformity of the algorithm to escape the cult, to get our GNT stuff out there. So if you can do that, that would be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, I guess we're talking about the whys and types of conformity. Okay, so this is, kind of an interesting little sub part of this whole thing. It has to do with like trying to understand like why people conform. And there's like kind of two big ideas here that come up. And I don't know what I think about. I certainly don't know what I think about one of them. So I'll be curious to hear your opinion, Daniel. So the
Yeah.
one thing is this idea of what they call informational influence and conformity, or sometimes they'll call it informational social conformity. The idea that people conform because they want to feel like they're correct.
Mm.
And it's one of the pressures. And this one gets presented in kind of a mixed way. In some ways, it's presented like a little bit positive, almost like, well, isn't that a reasonable thing to do? That you want to go through and, confide with others. That's the right word, or at least, kind of share your opinions with
Mm.
others. Maybe come to a more joint shared opinion that might be more accurate.
Hmm.
So this gets a little bit more TLC as being positive. I'm not sure what I think about that. But the stuff that we looked at last episode, we had talked about this really interesting Turkish social psychologist,
Yes.
this Muzaffer Sharif,
Hmm.
and they were looking at this sort of kind of visual illusion effect where the dot's still, but just because of the way the eye works, it kind of creates this idea that the dot's moving around. And they were asking people to kind of say how much they thought the dot was moving. And everyone had their own answers until eventually everyone coalesced on
Right.
this answer they agreed upon. The irony being that there's no accurate information to get out of that.
Right. They're all
Dot
wrong.
ain't moving at all. It's all
Right.
an illusion. That's the most Buddhist shit ever, by the way. It's an illusory dot moving, and we all eventually decide that it's moving a certain way. And it was kind of fascinating. So you can check out more of that episode if you want to hear more about that. But by the end of it, what's so interesting is that, and this has to do with like establishing social norms within a group with conformity too, which was once people started to agree on this, even when they showed people the optical illusion a year later, they still saw it the same way,
Mm.
which was the closure of last episode. And you and I both
Hmm.
agree. It's like, that's kind of trippy and kind of genius.
Hmm.
So thank you, Professor Sharif. So I guess that's the part that I'm not sure about. Again, a lot of times in the psych literature, it's presented a little bit more positive because you can see it in the context of like the sciences, or you have like the sangha in your spiritual practice, and people share ideas, and maybe you come to shared understandings, and obviously there can be positives around that. But even like the study itself, like has that weird illusory quality. And I suppose when you get to the problem of like cult psychology, which is our interest,
Mm,
then you have this problem of like, okay, people want to feel that they're right and they're coalescing their opinions with others. But it's partially like the Buddhist part of it is it's partially illusory. The dot isn't moving at all, or a lot of the ideas might not really be based on anything,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Either in that deeper kind of Buddhist philosophical sense, or maybe more in the like, it won't hold up, but we all want to feel that we're right. So we start like coalescing around something. I'm not sure what I think about that. I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that problem? I don't know. It's a nuance to me.
Yeah, I think people do that as a natural tendency for, I mean, I know we mentioned it earlier, but like social cohesion, right? I know we're talking about conformity,
Yeah.
but I think they're one of the same. So you're looking to build consent, like I guess consensus building is on
Mhm.
one hand is something that people are looking to do, generally speaking. It's hard to it's almost against one's nature to be anti to someone else's beliefs unless you know you're entering into a debate where someone is holding opposite views and you're either trying to one up them or prove them over to your point. Um, while we were kind of talking about this, I was looking this up and I wanted to see what the Bible had to say about this. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And so it says it in Galatians 1:10 states that, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or God? Am I trying to please people? If I were still
Mm.
trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." And
Yeah.
I find that interesting because that is a direct reference to being authentic,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think, at least from a relative outsider to this like Judeo-Christian culture. I mean, I am, and I'm not. But that doesn't seem to, that's not conformity. That's not preaching conformity. But when you think about something, at least in my mind, when I think about uh, not sociology, but like society, Christianity, these sort of like monoliths that it's almost inherent that you have to have conformity. You have to have a uniform viewpoint on things in order to fit into the group. Because ultimately, what are we talking about? I'm going to take the anthropological view, as I often do,
Hmm.
that this is a survival mechanism, and that
Okay.
having a conformed belief would keep you on the in crowd, which would keep you and your genetic line of beings safer and not ostracized, i.e., not kicked out of the small group or tribe and have to live on your own, if you could even do that, and therefore make you give you an opportunity to be more genetically successful, right? Be able to produce offspring and then see those offspring grow to
You're
produce
kind of doing like
offspring.
an Evo psych kind of conversation about
Yes,
that. Hmm.
yes. And so to me that screams of that right there, that you will seed something in order to make nice with those around you, especially when the numbers, and we talked about it last episode, but this kind of like tipping point is around 30%, 33% or so. Once you start, and that kind of yielded itself when you talked about in previous episode some of the test scores that were coming up. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
around that 25, 30% mark where they started to have people started to change their minds and go against what they had thought previously. They started, right? So because they were like, oh well, all these other people believe this thing, I guess I should believe it too. And so they suspend their own judgment in order to fit in, and that is a very detrimental from today's view, or from our view, I could say that's a detrimental place to be, because you're essentially becoming a martyr, really. You're not being authentic, you're not being yourself, you're fitting in at the cost of your own self. However,
You're martyring your own authenticity or something like that.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. But from today's view, if you are trying to fit in because you feel isolated, which more people, really, COVID accelerated the isolationist experience of modern humans. that you want to feel a sense of community. And so, what are you willing to do? Well, you are absolutely willing to adhere things that you adhere to things that you might not wholeheartedly believe in order to fit in that group of people who share many views with you, but maybe not all of them. And what I will say in conclusion to this is that like sometimes it's those cracks within your coherence with those around who you are trying to keep around you or you're trying to work to get in that are not cracks. Those are seeds. And those are seeds that are actually wanting to grow, that are trying to show you something. And if you don't give them the air that they need because you're worried about being viewed as being different or that you might end up being an outsider, then you're killing your own authenticity. You're killing the thing that you are, that is trying to be heard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got like this kind of sparked different things in my mind. On the one hand, I suppose we probably should do some Evo Psych thing off in the offing because I gotta really think what I think about that towards the end, personal even. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that might be thought provoking for other people too, because yeah, that's something that's a home based place for you, and I don't know what I totally think about that in terms of spiritual stuff. So it's something I have to really think through.
Mm-hmm.
The Jesus thing is really interesting because we did an episode a bit ago, probably sometime last year where it's the stuff from I can't remember if it's Luke or whatever it is, but we were kind of doing stuff around similar questions because we talk about these things. But there's a part one of the Japanese sort of Zen influenced philosophers was referencing. There's the whole like meeting the Buddha, killing the Buddha, meeting your mother,
Yeah.
killing your mother, that whole vibe, right?
Yeah.
And there's a part in one of the gospels where Jesus says things like, unless you hate your mother, your father, your family, this and that, you're not going to be able to follow me.
Yep.
So I don't know. It raises kind of like for us as a psychospiritual podcast, like, what, like, we wrestle with these questions a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm still, they're fascinating to me. I suppose I know what I think in a lot of ways, but maybe I don't know what I think about in every way around this. So yeah. Um, okay, well, I guess it leads into if you want to go, we can go to the next one of these real quick,
Let's do it.
So which would be the idea of normative influence and conformity. So they kind of try to divide this up. It guts into both the things you're talking about, Daniel. One side being sort of people, just want to have feedback to know that they're right, but maybe that can go wrong. You can try to be right, but go so wrong in, the ways that we were talking about. The other part is what you were getting to from the side of like people are just afraid. And
Mm.
there's a fear around nonconformity. So this is sort of more like normal, they call it normative influence and conformity, or sometimes normative social influence, where it's just kind of acknowledged people fear the negative consequences of not conforming.
Mm-hmm.
And what's weird in these psych studies, and that was the one where we did the Ash study in the first one we referenced with this, which is just trying to like see if you can get people to say that, you show them a line and you show like three other lines, and it's obvious that, two of the lines are the same and the two of the lines are the same and the other two and the other group don't match.
Mm-hmm.
And you see if you can pressure people into saying something obviously not true.
Right.
And that's what we were doing last time. And that one is, just the fear of having to like step out. And I guess, part of the question that comes up with it that's hitting me now. So COVID brain, but this idea, like, do you have to go through and eventually say, like, okay, I'm not going to like do what these other folks say
Mm-hmm.
to be a spiritual person? Because there's a lot of spirituality, like the quote you're having from the Gospels that talk that way,
Yeah.
right? And it's, what totally that means is a deep question. And we've done obviously Buddhist and Tantric questions around this too. But there's this fear and they describe this sort of like fear of rejection on the one hand, like what you were
Mm-hmm.
talking about from the Evo Psych perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You're afraid of getting rejected by the group, and there might be even some instinctual fear at the core of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also fits into like sort of our attachment theory episodes in a weird way to my mind
Yes.
too, because there's fear in that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's deep. And then this desire to be liked, the other side of this, you know? So you're in this situation where, these are the two things that motivate people. And in the aftermath of that whole line study thing by this psychologist, researcher, Ash, that's what people say. So there's a certain awareness they have, like, yeah, I knew I wasn't saying shit that was true. I knew that on some level I was conforming just to conform, and I was cracking just to get along with the rest of the group, who were
Mm-hmm.
all again like just the the setup people in the study, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so people seem to realize that on some level, which is interesting. It's not entirely like something that they're dissonant about. And it's interesting to know what that entirely means too,
Mm-hmm.
but that's part of the picture of it. And as I kind of went further, again, sort of standard social psych stuff, there's a real problem that people overrate their individualism.
Mm.
So people will think they're more individualistic than they actually act. It's sort of psych research kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That one always piques my curiosity too. And you and I have had conversations about this because I think your gut level reaction about American culture is it's very individualistic.
Or at least the idea of individualistic.
And that can mean multiple things. That could mean people are isolated,
Yes,
right?
that
In
for
which
sure.
case you would try to cling to others in a conformity way so you don't
Mm-hmm.
feel so alone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say, COVID brain. When you were talking earlier, there was one of the guys who was talking about breaking out, and he called it a cult. So he and I broke out of the MAGA cult.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had this thing that's, I can't remember the name of this whole organization, but it's something like that, breaking out of MAGA or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, again, we're just being blunt. A lot of these things are just cults, no matter what your political perspective
For
is,
sure, yeah.
cults. And so, and he was saying like it was, it's that fear of loneliness and that fear of isolation, right? Those things that you were referencing. So, yeah. And so people feel that kind of stuff, obviously. Uh, and so that's kind of the social isolation part, maybe, of American culture. But I
Mm.
always have the like a gut level sort of thing that the American culture has a lot of conformity to it. I tend to see it from that perspective.
Mm.
And I don't know what you think about that, but I tend to see it as a very kind of conformist culture and not so individualistic. So, but I don't know what you think about that.
Well, the idea of
Put in that way, I don't know.
the idea of individualism is sold as an inherent aspect of this place. I don't
Yeah,
even
yeah,
call it a culture. I think it's just this area, you know?
yeah.
Uh, but I think that's what's being sold. That's one of the mantras. But I believe that to be a paper tiger, you know?
Okay. Okay. We're probably closer than what we think about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the idea or the ideal, perhaps better stated, but not in practice, not necessary, not anymore, anyways. Maybe it was whatever, however long ago, but the sides have really shored up much of the sort of juicy middle, if you will.
Talk about in the political sense too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, individuals on a one-on-one basis, when you remove them from their setting, are going to have different views because they're not going to be around others who are upholding aspects of their ideology for them, where they have to fit in. So you probably will find more cohesion between people who have different beliefs on a one-on-one level because of this idea of conformity, to be honest. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're going to look for things that you agree upon when there's nothing else around you, when the structure is taken away. You will often find, and as I do when I have conversations with people, we agree far more than we disagree. Yes, we have some disagreements on how to do this or how to do that, but most people that I talk to are into, we'll say social safety nets and whatever. But then if you look at maybe what the policies that they back, they're against it. But when you talk to
Yeah,
them
there's that weird
individually,
irony and like that disconnect between those two things, right?
yeah, totally. So it's just like it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think what I would say on as to all of this is like there's two pieces to this. One is duality. And when it feels better to be right than to be wrong, i.e. duality, right? Good and bad, light and dark, right and wrong. It feels better to be right. And
Hmm.
when there's other people around you who are right, who are quote unquote right, you have the sense of wanting to be in coherence with them. So that's one.
So I guess I find that to be like the dangerous instinct about that informational part of this,
Yes,
right? There's it's presented kind of positive, but I see there's a real danger
it's
there
dangerous.
because of that desire to want to be right.
Yes.
Eventually we all agree on what the illusory dot is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's it go again, like this part interests me because again, presented kind of positive, but there's an
Yeah.
underlying danger in that for sure. Yeah. Okay, cool.
And then the other part is um, conditioning. So we talk about non-duality and really finding a place of seeing through the illusory nature of reality, i.e., the duality of reality, right? On a macro level, and then moving down to the micro level, it's overcoming duality within oneself to be able to say like right, wrong, whatever. There is a path here that is going to not make either one happy because it's going to challenge their views. Okay, fine. But when you do that, when you take that part, the challenging of others' views and of your own views, which means you're not going to be a nonconformist, is that you have to then in intentionally challenge your conditioning. So, what I'm saying in a specific sense, not even necessarily in like this esoteric sense, although it is esoteric simultaneously, because we could speak both. You have to be willing to say things that might ostracize you or that might bring about the feelings of shame momentarily because your views don't fit with someone else's views. But if you hold them wholeheartedly, even if you're quote unquote wrong, if you can work through the layers that got you to that place of we'll say incorrectedness and of not being non-correct, whatever correct is in the case of this study, like these two lines are the same, they're not different, then you will be able to at that point, if you care to, work backwards and learn where your mistake was. And now that has become beneficial for you because you can show your work. Like our teacher, like our math teachers in high school or grade school wanted us to show your work. Why? So you could find out where you were incorrect. And then now you can learn and be correct, quote unquote, correct moving forward. But if we don't do that, well, then A, you're stuck in duality. So then either you're right or you're wrong, and there's no difference, i.e., you're with us or against us. There is no middle ground. Number one, so you're kind of fucked at this point, right? Because you're dealing with deep feelings of being in or out of the tribe in this case, and being isolated if you're out, and being accepted and loved if you're in, right? Or at least those are our instincts. And then number two, working against the layers of conditioning that teach us that this is the way to be, right? Because independence and individuality, even though they are, what I would believe to be like core American ideals or ideas, in practice, you have to go against the grain when the grain is at its grainiest in order for you to find out who you are and who is your authentic person. But that is very difficult for people because you're going to have to confront shame and isolation simultaneously sometimes in order to be able to do that. And you have to stand firm in that and be who you are. And that is not an easy thing to do. It is far easier to say these two lines are the same, even though they're blatantly different. And so moving just one macro level to like the idea of the cults and politics in particular in this case, can you agree with some people and then have disagreements with them and do that in multiple places? That's the hard
Very,
part.
very difficult, right?
Very
Yeah.
difficult to do. Very difficult to do. And then
Yeah.
who you surround yourself with and how you carry yourself. Can you shake hands with somebody after you have a conversation about things? Can you find common grounds, but can you also agree to disagree? And there's nothing wrong with that. This is hard for people to do because in this day and age, especially again, we're not political, but like we're talking kind of politics at the moment. Many people have a very hard time admitting mistake political or even in on a normal level. It's very
Well,
hard
that
to
goes
admit
back to the underlying
mistakes.
feeling I want to be right from like the first problem.
Correct. Correct.
You want to look at the problem with that. There it is. And then
Hmm.
I thought they don't do it all the time, but I'll probably pop some notes down for us, show notes on like the whole problem of cognitive dissonance at some point because they don't always include it here, but it has to be talked about. But
Yeah.
for future
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as the psych research goes, this Ash with the lines study guy eventually got, well, okay, is there a legit fear to like be out of step psych research wise with the crowd? Not
Yeah.
too surprising with the answer, which is like, yeah.
Yep.
So in general, he went further to look into this and he said, yeah, people tend to dislike, reject, or laugh at non-conforming people.
Yep.
And then it takes a lot to be able to kind of do that. I guess that's the irony. I guess you can't just blame it on Americans or something, but I guess
No.
there's the contrast of the imagery. I know what you're saying. A lot of like the American advertising culture and all that, there's that weird play of like the individualism and then like I don't
Yeah.
know. There's always these sort of weird dynamics within that. I'm an independent individual. Look at me rock. And then the other part is like, I got my whole tribe around me and we're all going out to the club or something. It's always like that where we're all fam. It's like that kind of thing. It's like there's always those tensions in there. But
Yeah.
again, maybe because of, what we're doing in terms of like spiritual stuff underneath the surface, like Jesus was talking about, or these Zen masters, whoever, there's always this need to be able to assert one's own spiritual individuality. So,
Eric, so this is there is one so I've never had a Twitter or whatever it's called now. I don't care. Um why? Why is that the case? Because when you go on Twitter or whatever it is called, you know what you're supposed to do? Follow people.
yeah.
And you know what I'm not going to do? Follow no fucking body. Nobody. One guy, I remember I was trying to get a job at this place and they sold like very high end medical and fitness equipment and one of the people who I don't know, she was a CFO of this company, um, was a client of mine when I was teaching boot camp. And so I would go over there and use their equipment and bring people and try, I had some investors and I was trying to make deals happen and whatever. And the CEO was like, "Oh yeah, you should follow me on Twitter." And I was like, "I'm not following you anywhere."
Oh,
I, I
really?
I didn't know what it was at the time. And he's like, "No, no, no, it's like an online platform, like whatever, you sign up and then you could follow people." And I was like, "I'm not following anybody anywhere." The last person I said that I would follow was my drill sergeant, and I meant that I would follow that person. Other than that, I'm not following anybody anywhere under any circumstances. I don't even like to follow directions. I intentionally make wrong turns when I'm on when I'm
Well,
using
I
a
can
GPS.
testify that because Daniel and I will like go through some description of something, and Daniel, like the mic will go on, he'll talk some other shit has nothing to do. I'm teasing, it's a joke, but
Yeah.
you like to do things in that independent way. That's your charm,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
who you are.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, I guess we can go on to the last piece of this
Yeah.
before we
Perfect.
end this episode.
Yeah.
Um, so the last part is sort of this private and public elements of this, and that kind of ends this little section. And the next time we're going to talk about the Stanford prison experiment for
Oh,
sure.
that is yes. Yes. I'm familiar.
Yeah. So so there's like this is also shown like sometimes they'll say like external conformity versus internalization. So there certainly can be the situation where people will kind of show like a public conformity, but hold their own views inside,
Mm,
you know, and that's something to think about, what that totally means. I'm still debating that too. I obviously have some notes for myself for like, what are the dangers of that somehow, right? Because it's like we were saying before, you still won't challenge anything,
mm-hmm.
so shit will still go along. And then there's the whole issue of like private, you know, uh, but private conformity, which means that people change their own internal views. So the research around that. And that was part of the stuff with the guy with the illusory dot, our guy, Professor Sharif, basically saying that people were kind of changing their internal norms. They just flipped,
Mm,
right? And they
mm-hmm.
deeply internalized, right? The other part, the line experiments were more based on the idea like, yeah, okay, I know on some level that those lines don't match, but I'm going to like show the public face, right? And so, that's kind of the idea. I suppose the question that I had with this in terms of like this last little bit of like cult psychology is, what's really happening within those spaces, right? To
Mm-hmm.
what extent are these things where people are publicly expressing things that they don't truly believe inside,
Mm,
right? Or to what extent are we talking about things where the internal gears are already sort of reworked, right? And and listening to some people talk about what it's like to be, now we're talking about not cults in like the big picture sense, but like cults in the more narrow definition, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I was listening to oh, I mentioned her name last week, Professor Stain. She pronounces it Stains, Stein, but okay. All right, whatever floats your boat.
Mm-hmm.
But as I always say, Professor Stain, that sounds like a villain from like some old Batman thing or something. Um, But in any case, she was talking about this, and that's that feeling of like internal tension,
Mm,
right? This idea that, okay, we can talk about two ideas that these experiments try to show. One is this idea of like, okay, I don't really believe this, but I'll do this for the outward face of this. That still may be dangerous because I'm still not willing to challenge things. Okay. But then this idea that, okay, maybe my own internal things are completely changed. But in the cult setting, as things start to like become disjointed, right? All the tension that that creates, right? At a certain point, I suppose there's this experience of like, okay, to what extent am I showing just the public face of something I don't really believe, or to what extent do I really make myself believe this somehow? Which got me to think
mm,
about the cognitive dissonance aspect,
mhm,
but how
mhm.
this starts to crumble. And we're watching this. We're doing this partially for political reasons. We're watching this. We don't know when people are going to be listening to this episode, and we're not going to tie it up to the local politics of the week or something like that for this. But we're making this in 2025, folks. So, there's a lot of shit going down where there's going to be a lot of tension for people to have to try to like figure this out again, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, I don't know, you got any like other thoughts about any of that kind of stuff, that tension between public and private? That you've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are doing any kind of regular reflection, self-reflection, it's going to be more difficult. The internal cognitive dissonance to how you think and believe internally, and then as that manifests externally into your words and your deeds, they're not, at least for me, I'm just speaking for myself at this point. That's going to be much more difficult. Like things that I don't believe are going to have a harder time leaving my mouth than if I was not, if I didn't have an aspect of myself that was deeply internally reflective. Because I would be like, this is highly incongruent with what I am thinking. And, maybe people who are listening to this, they, if you say, oh, I would never give up my principles for X, Y, or Z. Okay, maybe you wouldn't, but man, lots of people do. I mean, there's a whole study that shows people who do that. And
Yeah,
it's
that's the
like,
trouble with individualism. People overrate the willingness that they're going to have to do that, right?
you'd be
So,
surprised. But,
yeah.
history shows time and time again, citizens of many countries and cultures are willing to accept dastardly things. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's easy to say on your own, but then when you get around other people who are saying they're shouting the same things, are you going to be the one who is going to? Are you willing to accept shame and potential victimization? Because of your beliefs? I'm not. I'm not sure. I think the answer is yeah. You know, like you'll fit in, and in today's world, there is just I just think that we're so isolated. We're looking for places to plug in and make community, and it's harder and harder to do in person. So we find up more kind of community online, and it's just easier to be absorbed into those things, and then your internal talk changes, and then here we are.
Yeah, because you get to the attachment theory part too, because the guy was talking about, of course, you have the public and the private face. These two studies are trying to capture that, right?
Yes.
Optical illusion, Professor Shafir, is that his name? I'm forgetting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, his thing of like, okay, now we've really changed your norms internally, right?
Yes.
You're not going to see this dot the same way again. So to reevaluate, to realize that dot still, I'm going to have to break something in myself to
Mm.
re-see what that thing really is. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
certain challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then the other part is the public facing part, which presumably builds up because you want to like conform because of things of fears and afraid of being disliked, and like you're
Yeah.
talking about evo psych things, attachment issues, and so on. And then when you get to the extremes of being enmeshed in something that eventually you're going to have to see like, oh man, this shit ain't true.
Yeah.
It's going to take those, I guess you're breaking part of that illusion of the dot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're also going to have to deal with that other side of this pressure of like, oh fuck, now that I'm thinking this, I'm not going to be able to believe this anymore,
Right.
right? Now I'm really risking all of this psycho-emotional attachment theory shit.
Yes.
I'm in serious trouble. And the guy who was scaring his own experience of like, again, his framing of MAGA as a cult, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point he was saying, yeah, man, it was hard because it was like this was sort of my alternative family.
Mm-hmm.
right, in this
Mm-hmm.
community. And now I'm risking it's not even strangers, obviously, then in those studies with the lines. You don't know those people. They don't mean anything
Correct.
to you, right?
Right.
You start raising the ante on these things, and all of a sudden you're
Mm.
talking to people that you have these deeper emotional bonds with that you're gonna have to like
Yeah.
challenge. So, all right. Well, to be continued, we'll go
Yeah.
through, we're gonna do Stanford prison stuff, right? Unless I didn't mean to cut that off, Daniel. I'm sorry. Just any more you want to say about that stuff, or are we
No,
captured it?
it just gets, I was just gonna say this to what, where you were here. The stakes raise. The stakes get raised when the people around you have more meaning to you than just rando strangers, right?
Yeah, then it's
Um,
attachment theory stuff, right?
yeah, and now right now you've gone from, and that's why the attachment theory stuff is really, it's so important. It really is because your bonds with one other person, your the connection to you and your community is just the bonds between you and one other person amplified in a 360-degree
Yeah.
way. And it makes it very difficult for change when you have the pressure of the relationship on top of you because now you have to deal with disappointment of the other person to then your own issues are going to come up. Are you abandoning them? Do you feel like you're hurting them? Are you
Yeah.
disappointing them? And all those things they put pressure on you to conform, to fit in, to say the right thing, to make it nice, right? To people please,
Yeah.
essentially. And that there's a lot of pressure on that,
Yeah.
to be the right one. And it's not easy. But again, the solution, because sometimes we don't always give solutions. This is not the solution. This is a solution, is to have, you can call it a moral compass if you want to. I think that's a bit more ambiguous term, but I'm going to say a practice of self-reflection. To really have a mechanism of understanding what is coherent within yourself and then be willing to stand on, as the kids say, stand on business. Like you got to be able to do that shit. You have to keep it 100. Like that's,
Yeah.
because if not, then you're going to be yielding yourself in the process. And over time, it's going to be much harder to get those things back because the emotional ties that you're going to have is not going to just be with one person. It's going to be with a multitude of people. So breaking out the layers of conditioning is really important, which goes back to our, 9 obstacles, the one
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
family and responsibilities and the pressure of breaking out of those things. It's hard. It's a hard fucking thing, but that's part of the left-handed path. I mean, this is the tantrikas, this is the yogis, this is the roomies. These are the people who live kind of like inside and outside of society because they don't necessarily fit in and they're viewed as strange because they don't do all the things everybody else does. But those are the ones who get remembered. Those are the real individuals, handfuls over billions and billions of people over the last how many thousands of years. So there are more than just what stories are written about. There's many, many, many free people in the world, for sure, even today. Enlightened, totally beautiful human beings, And my only thought by doing this, by having these conversations, is to ignite that shit. And whoever is listening to this, that's it. That's my goal.
I got two reactions to it real quick before we pop out.
Yep.
But one is like, I think I don't find fault in this part of the psych literature. It's not like I think there's holes in it, but because that attachment theory part isn't included here,
Yeah.
that's something that I think is valuable to add, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they
Mm-hmm.
have their place, right? Because they're showing human tendencies in these relatively innocuous settings, right?
Yeah.
But like, so there's a neutrality there or something, right?
Yeah.
You can see the human tendency hidden underneath those things that are still there. But I think that is something that we can add to this conversation, or we're adding here.
Yeah.
You look in social psych books, it's not like they don't recognize that, but they're not necessarily talking about that. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a piece for
Mm-hmm.
sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part, I'm glad you said the things that you said, because to me, I think what ends up being important then is to have what's helped me would be like having spiritual paths that I identify with that have that streak in them,
Yeah.
and then for me, it started with Zen, and it's very like, no, you have to establish your own individual cognitive space. This is what has to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And then, like think all the ones that ultimately I felt like I identified with, whether it was Zen things or Taoist things, or ultimately like the tantric things, more the
Mm-hmm.
Buddhist tantra for us, but all tantra has this.
Yeah.
Like you have to establish your own internal space.
Yeah.
right? And that's like core to the thing. And maybe that is like to the extent there's a solution, like that's a solution. And then
Yeah.
you can almost like re-identify in a way,
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, no, I'm a Zen Taoist tantrika, and this is what we do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it gives you a different identity. And maybe in the end you find a different kind of community too.
Yes.
Yeah, a kind of community that doesn't demand the same things from you.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Kind of community that supports your individuality.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That it's hard to do, but there it's out there, and whatever you want is it's all out there.
What we're trying to do here,
Yeah.
I mean, we did this retreat earlier, and it wasn't like, it's a retreat based on the idea like let's engage ourselves in practice. We're all equals. We're all here. We
Yes.
took on the roles of teachers for that retreat, but hey,
We've been
yeah,
students on plenty more retreats than we have been teachers on them.
yeah. Well, that's true too. But also,
Yeah.
like, we're going to enter in this space with a sense of equality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we're trying to create, like an equal spiritual space.
Yeah.
All right,
Exactly.
beautiful. I'm in.
All right, sign me up. Let's go.
Thanks
Eric, as always, man, thank you so much for
much.
driving on the ship, man. I appreciate it. Audience, thank you so much for listening. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Definitely subscribe if you're not, please. It does help us out. We do appreciate all those who do it. If you haven't yet, it costs you nothing. Do it. Do it right now. Or do it in a minute. You know what I'm saying? Share our work if you find it interesting. You can slide in our DMs on the gram at the Gin and Tantra podcast if you have any comments or anything else that you'd like to share. We always do love to hear from our audience. We've definitely done some really wonderful episodes based on some questions or suggestions that our audience had. So we're definitely interactive. So ginandtantra@gmail.com, or hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay free. Peace.
Peace.